sous les maillots. Il est le roi du vélo. Le monde entier l'applaudit. Bravo pour Eddie. Quand il se met à rouler, rien ne peut plus la...
Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to episode 2 of This Cycling Life. I say good morning, of course, because I'm sitting here in Belgium. Allan Davis sitting in the Basque Country in Spain and Michael Rogers in Switzerland. I'm Jamie Anderson. I'm a professor of leadership at Antwerp Management School. And when I'm not in the classroom, of course, I'm out training and racing my bike. Allan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, thank you Jamie. Yes, I'm Allan Davis, currently working as a technical advisor for the UCI, former professional bike rider and high performance coach.
Excellent. And over to you, Mick.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon and good evening to everyone, no matter where you're coming to today. My name's Michael. I'm part of the team.
Hey, Mick, you got to look at the camera, mate. You're looking at yourself on the computer there. You got to make.
Sorry. Well, I'm looking actually outside because it's such a beautiful day here, James.
Sorry, I cut you off. Okay. Do you want to start the intro again, Mick? But look at the people. Look at your camera.
No, again, I'm Michael. I'm part of the Team NTT performance team. Lived a long past life of professional cycling and looking forward to this today's webinar.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, guys. Of course, this will be interactive. I see Sean McBride is raising his hand down there. So Sean, thanks for that. Put your hand up. But actually, we're not very good at multitasking. So what we're going to actually be doing is using the Q&A function. I see some people using chat and stuff already. The only thing we're going to be looking at is Q&A. Otherwise, we're juggling things and getting completely freaked out. So if you would like to interact with us, ask us a question throughout, please use Q&A. We don't have your video and audio activated because we have actually over 300 people registered from 18 countries today. So we're just going to be using the Q&A chat. Now, actually, during our first episode, Mick, coming back to you of This Cycling Life, you showed a pretty special painting of yourself. But unfortunately, when you did so, you were in that little mode up in the top right corner because we had a slide showing. So a lot of people complained that they didn't see the painting. So what I'm going to do now, actually, I'm going to share that painting for people who missed it. And maybe you could even tell us, just show a few words about it. So let me just get to this one. Mick, can you tell us about this painting, mate? This is the painting you have in your office, right? Not at home.
It is. It was a gift from my fans club. And the actual artist is quite a renowned artist in the Italy and Swiss region. And he actually does quite a lot of paintings for the politicians and, let's say the royal families. So I entered into royalty in some ways once I had this painting done. But
pretty special combination. I mean, the combination of the bleach blonde hair, Ayers Rock, the jersey. We actually showed this to our mate Ramandeep Singh, who supports us on all the technical background here. He's in Mumbai, and Ramandeep christened Mick the Aussie Duke of Switzerland after he saw this. So
well, they were in my younger days when I had a little bit more hair, and I could, when you're young and you did things like that. But as you can see now, I'm losing it. So maybe a little bit too much bleach.
This is good. I see Sean Rolls from Australia. Actually, Sean's an Aussie, but he lives in Sweden. I can see he's already given you a bit of rubbing in the Q&A there, Mick, which is actually very important today because what you would have also heard at the start of this webinar is you would have heard our new theme song, which is Bravo Eddie by Jean Nancy, which was released in 1970. And what we have today, you see this is an original Jean Nancy record. We're going to be giving this away today. We're going to be signing this, autographing it. All three of us are going to be sending it out there to whoever, I guess, tells the funniest joke or asks the funniest question in the Q&A, right? Because we love humor on this webinar. The only thing we don't like is humor that has an ism in it, if you know what I mean, all right? So keep it clean, keep it fun, and keep it positive because we're all about positive energy. All right, what are we going to do? We're going to jump right in. And now, as I said, please do split the screen if you'd like, folks, because we're going to be showing some slides today. If you split that screen by selecting your view, you'll have us on the right, the slides on the left. What we've been doing over the last few weeks is collecting questions from you folks. And we've had an amazing response, actually, because what we want this webinar to be about is really about you. So we've been getting those questions in about topics that you're interested in. And what we've been doing actually is putting those questions into 3 buckets. So here's the 3 buckets that we've kind of worked out. The first bucket is what we call getting there. The second bucket is being there. And then the third bucket is what we're going to term happily ever after. Now, what are these about? Well, number 1, getting there. This is going to be about everything related to preparing your body for intensive training and competition. Because what we believe is that if you don't have that solid foundation, then the risk is that you can end up with a pretty shaky house. So that'll be getting there. Number 2 will be about being there. And this will be really thinking about peak performance. How do you refine it? How do you maintain it? And we'll be talking there even about specific training approaches and stuff like race day nutrition and stuff like that. The happily ever after, the third bucket, what that's going to be about is all the stuff related to motivation and mental health, relationships. And this is, we believe, super important because so many of us out there are juggling work and family and our sport. But in this bucket, we'll also be talking about race tactics. So we hope that makes sense to everybody, but it is about you. So please keep interacting with us and keep those questions coming in. So why don't we jump right in, guys? How does that sound? Mick, are you ready?
Ready to roll.
Are you pumped, Allan?
I am.
You want to do the sprinter's victory salute there? Good on you, mate. Here we go.
Come on,
So
mate.
let's jump right in, getting there. We had this question from Peter in the UK, and Peter said he's already qualified actually to compete at the UCI Gran Fondo Championships in Canada in September. And Peter's question was, when should I start my preparations and what should the first phase of those preparations involve? So what I'd like to do actually, I'd like to hand over to you, Allan, as a coach. This is actually very similar to the question I came to you with when we first started working each other a few years ago. So can you talk us through this, Allan?
Yes, for sure, Jamie. You know, this is a question I think a lot of us will have on our minds. First of all, I would say we have to start now. That's one of the phases. You know, I normally work on 6 months out from a goal, and we're definitely in that, just in the first phase of that 6 month cycle. First of all, I'd like to basically talk through the first phase that we would do in terms of preparation. I kind of think of it like building a house. We want the foundation of the house to be rock solid, and then we work on the rest of the house after that. So the next 8 weeks, so to speak, we will work on gym. We'll combine gym work and low intensity cycling, core stability. All this will come into play later on in your phases to gain optimal form. Other sports that you can do as well, hobbies that you may like. For example, 1 day a week, we would combine that into your program. What this does, which I really found helpful for me personally, is keeps you mentally fresh. So you're gaining a base and a foundation, but at the same time, you're maintaining mental freshness, and that will really help later on when we get into the really hard phases.
Yeah, good. I mean, it'd be good to hear from you a bit more on the gym work, because that was something that you really emphasized with me when we started working together. And in fact, I think we started with about a 10-week, pretty intensive gym sort of regime. Why do you see gym as being so important? Because essentially what you had me doing was sort of a general gym program, 6 or 7 leg exercises. But then you also had me doing some pretty special stuff like the, what do you call it? Pyrotechnics?
I think in English we actually call that plyometrics, Jamie. Yeah.
Sorry, Mick, I'm Australian, man. English language. What do you call it?
Plyometrics. What did you call it?
All right. So Al, tell us about this stuff, mate. I mean, why is the gym so important in this phase?
It's definitely really important in the foundation phase. You have to really work on your muscle capacity and your strength. And as you get through the weeks of the gym and the low intensity riding, you'll really feel like your body mass will increase a little bit, and you'll feel a lot stronger. And then the next phase, we alternate the gym sessions to on the bike simulated gym sessions like strength endurance training. We can get more into that later on, but it's basically like going back to what I said before about the foundation, making it as strong as possible to not only get you into getting good form, it's also maintaining that form. And that's when the gym will come into play as well.
Well, that was interesting for me, Allan, because, you know, with the gym work that you had me doing, you know, I was also progressively improving, right? You know, with my squats and my leg presses and all that stuff. The plyometrics. I mean, why did you get me doing the plyometric? I mean, what is plyometric? It's basically, you know, it's like I'm standing on the floor and then I jump up onto a box. And I started with, I think like I don't know, 30 centimeters, then I went to 50. And after that sort of 10 or 12 week period, I was jumping up on a 75 centimeter box. I mean, Mick, maybe you have some experience with that. Why is that important? That kind of explosive plyometric stuff?
Well, particularly in sprinting, it's that ability to, you know, whack, you know, have that really fast acceleration, and those first 5 pedal strokes. I mean, for a lot of times in the sprints, it's those first 5 pedal strokes that sets up the win.
Yeah.
You know, you look at a guy, I think, Mark Cavendish. I mean, obviously we're talking about, you know, the highest category here. If you really break down what Mark does, is he wins those sprints in those 5 first pedal strokes because he's just so explosive.
Yeah.
And the plyometrics is very productive into increasing that explosiveness.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting when we look here. I mean, if you look at the photo here we have, that's Chris Froome. I mean, he's not exactly Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? But have a look what he's got behind him, actually. Have a look at the squat rack and have a look at the discs. He's pushing some pretty big weight there. But also what you see behind him are the plyometric boxes. So he's doing this stuff. He's not a sprinter, that's for sure. But he also clearly sees the value of this during this build phase, because he actually shared this with us. Well, actually, sorry, not just with us, because he shared it on Twitter with his other zillion followers, but he shared this a few weeks ago. So he's doing that. Allan, yeah, sorry, Allan, go ahead.
Sorry to butt in, mate, but I'd like to add also, for example, for yourself, I kept in mind that, you know, you are a master's athlete.
Yeah.
You know, you have a lot of years under your belt already of training. Same for the question before. So, you know, you have to take that into account, and maybe that explosive training has been left out for a lot of years. So the gain from doing that again is enormous. You know, and the fast twitch fibers, just stimulating them again, and not only for a sprint, but also to that explosiveness you need to maybe get across to a breakaway or make a breakaway. It really transfers well onto the bike.
Yeah, I can speak. That was amazing for me, Allan, right? Because I think when we first did my testing, when I first started working with you, my peak power was at around 1,050 watts. So, you know, this is the power that I can hold for like 5 seconds, you know, peak power. And then I think after, you know, there was this 10, 12 week period. And then we also moved to the sprint training on the bike, which we'll maybe talk about a bit later. After 3 months, I was putting out almost 1,300 watts. And that for me was a huge, you know, that was a big improvement. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, I'm putting out the same watts as Andre Greipel or anybody like that, but actually I don't have to. I just have to be able to put out more watts than the other 50-year-old guy, you know, in the race. So I certainly saw the value of that later in the season. Can you talk to us a bit about the core work, Allan? Because that was something else you really had me working on. Yeah,
core stability work is fundamental for any bike rider. You know, not only during the foundation phase, but also through the whole phases of your preparation and your racing season. Yeah. Core stability work really helps you with your pedaling style, you know, the transparency of the power going through the pedals to make it faster on a bike. Yeah. Not only that, you know, we've all had our friend in the bunch ride who's rocking the shoulders. You know, you can see they're really using a lot of energy other than pedaling a bike, you know, through their shoulders and upper body. You know, the core stability work will really make you more efficient on the bike and make you, you know, less moving in terms of the upper body, and that energy will be saved to predominantly give you more energy to put through the pedals. So all that comes from that core stability training. And that's why I do it through the whole session, the whole phases and the seasons of a preparation.
And Mick, your experience with core, I mean, was that always part of what you do? But thinking about these masters athletes that we're talking to, because, you know, I guess one of the things is bike riders tend to do an awful lot of stuff below the waist, you know, leg stuff.
Sure.
what's particularly relevant, for masters, would you think here? Because, we are a bit older, we're not 20 years old, we don't have the same physiology. Is there any particular aspects we would need to think about?
Well, sure. No doubt core is important. Through my professional cycling career, I was lucky enough to have a core coach, would come to training camps and we'd spend maybe up to an hour some days doing this stuff. But I don't think it has to be that time consuming. I'm thinking keeping something very simple, very practical, maybe 3 times a week, just, invest 15 minutes into doing some core work, some push-ups, keep a little bit of strength in the shoulders too, because as you said, Jamie, cyclists traditionally invest hours and hours and hours in their legs. But if you don't have the core to be able to hold your upper body up and be able to climb out of the seat, all these things, you need your core to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it makes sense. We've got some questions coming in too, guys. So there was a question there. We got some funny. I'm Frederica, who actually we're going to have on a future episode, I hope. Frederica's a neuroscientist. She's actually asked about when we're going to get to combining work and workout. We'll come to that, Frederica. That's going to come a little bit later in part 2 of this webinar. There was a question from Glenn Ball who talks about, should the focus of gym be on high weight or high reps? Now, that's an interesting one. Who would like to take that one? Allan, you want to have a chat to talk to that? High weight or high reps?
Well, the first answer I would say, it depends on the characteristics of cyclist you are. Obviously the sprinter style cyclist would be working more on the explosiveness of the gym work. So, the higher weights, lower reps. Flip side of that, a climber would do lesser weights and more reps, and some different exercises as well as what an explosive sprinter would use.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if I come to my training, Allan, that was part, we talked in episode 1 about analyzing your capabilities as a rider. And very early on, you and I looked at my track record and said, okay, I have that potential to definitely to sprint. I'm punchy. So that's why we brought in the plyometrics, because that's explosiveness and the 5. Sorry, Nick, don't give me a hard time, man. Plyometrics. So that's why we did the plyometrics. And actually, a lot of the stuff that I was doing in the gym was relatively, when we say low reps, how many reps is that? I mean, for me, I guess we were doing 8 to 12, something like that for a lot of the exercises, short, more explosive stuff. But also, again, as a masters athlete, taking it easy on the weight because you don't want to injure yourself, right? You don't want to jump into the gym and suddenly be, squatting 200 kilograms or leg pressing. So that was also something you impressed upon me, Allan, was to do it progressively, right? To not overdo it. But the reality is, as masters as well, I think, Mick, you alluded to it, is that, one of the things we know about cyclists is that we underutilize our upper body. So core is part of that, but also in addition to the lower body stuff, I was doing push-ups, I was doing, some upper body stuff as well, because particularly on the punchy stuff, the sprints, you are activating your upper body as well. So we need to be aware of that. Look, I want to move on, guys. Allan, one of the other things that surprised me early on is that you didn't have me riding my bike that much. You had me swimming and jogging and hiking with my kids. Why was that? Why did you actually de-emphasize bike riding in a way?
Well, Jamie, this is a really interesting question because, like I had said before, it all comes down to mental freshness. It's a long season for everyone, no matter what level of cyclist you are. So the more fresher you can stay mentally and getting fit and the benefits at the same time, that is going to be incredibly important to you later on when the training really intensifies. So you're really, you're fresh mentally to combat those weeks of training, So I always like to find out it doesn't have to be what I like, it's what an individual likes, and they could change, hobby, whether it's hiking, swimming, surfing, whatever that's active and keeps you fresh mentally. I always combine that into that first 8 weeks of training.
I mean, Mick, look, guys like Richie Porte, Edvald, what are these guys doing during the off season? They're not right. They're doing. I mean, what Richie was a former triathlete. He swims an awful lot. I think what does Edvald do? He
He does a lot of cross-country skiing. Obviously, living in the Nordic region, northern Europe, they spend a lot of time skiing.
Yeah.
I had a personal fantastic experience actually downhill skiing.
Right.
One of my big mentors, and coaches, has been Bjarne Riis, and he swears by downhill skiing is actually a really good effort for your thighs, and a really good strength training. So there's a lot of sports you can do, and as we progress with coaching, and we're learning more about the benefits of doing other sports and the benefit that has to cycling.
I think also something we shouldn't ignore, actually, we haven't touched on, is the fact that we are in this COVID-19 reality right now, and a lot of people are under lockdown. So, one of the things that I was thinking about this morning is, if you don't have access to a gym, which I don't at the moment. So, what did I do? I ordered the plyometric box. I ordered the plyometric box. It's sitting here in my living room. Plyometrics you can do at home, jumping onto a box, doing that kind of stuff. Sure. You can do the core work at home right now. So if you don't have access to a gym, you need to think a little bit creatively, because not all of us have Chris Froome's gym at home, right? We don't. Definitely that kind of stuff you can do. The core
also the kids,
Children, absolutely. You can bench press your children, whatever you want.
Exactly, yeah.
So, the other sports, some of us can still walk, hike, stuff like that. So we just need to think creatively about keeping our general fitness level up at the moment if we're unable to ride our bike. I mean, the other thing, of course, we didn't mention, because my little son, Charlie's just walking into the room, is that this is I spend a lot of time with my kids during this phase, because I take them to the swimming pool, take them hike. Charlie, come over for a second. So this is my son, Charlie. I spend a lot of time. So during the off season, Charlie, we're going off to the swimming pool, hiking. Yeah. What do you think of it?
It sucks.
What do you mean it sucks? Did you hear what he said? He said it sucks. You see, this is what happens when you want to spend time with a almost 13-year-old kid. But for me, it's actually nice. I take him to the pool, we hike and stuff like that. Look, why don't we move on? I'll look at the questions in a second. The next step here, of course, next question we're going to get into is the being there, right? And we had this question about indoor training. And this one came from David in Australia. And he said, I'm commuting a lot. I'm working long hours. 50-60% of my training is indoors. How should I optimize my use of indoor training in the mix? So Mick, do you want to talk to this one?
I'd be happy to. Yeah. I mean, indoor cycling, there's a huge benefit from, and there's a couple of things that Jamie just put up there on the screen is the effectiveness. Mm-hmm. I also struggle with a few words, Jamie, that,
English is our second language. We're Australian.
Of indoor training, it's different to training outdoors, and general rule of thumb is 1.5 rule. So as you've written there, for 5 hours of training indoors, general rule of thumb, you'll get the same benefit as 7.5 hours out on the road. It's very specific, not only for bad weather. There is a part of the season where indoor training can be very effective if you're doing efforts. You don't have, or intervals. You don't have traffic lights. You don't have to interact with the traffic. If you've got a very specific session, consider doing it on the home trainer, because you have that effect.
I think that's a super important one for me. I remember when I started working with Allan, right? I'd get these training protocols from Allan, 6 times 5 minutes seated power on a steady climb. I'm like, Allan, I live in Antwerp. It's flat. There is no 5-minute climb, dude. So, for stuff like that, for example, climbing intervals, or, like you said, sometimes, the micro interval efforts that Allan has had me doing for that kind of stuff, you need a controlled environment. So, this is very, very important, I think.
And you just actually sparked the thought on that is, with all the latest platforms, your Swift, your Be Cools, your Trainer Roads, et cetera, I mean, they're so engaging. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure all on this call, we can exchange stories about training 10 years ago on a home trainer, the old school A-frame, staring at a blank wall.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, how engaging is it now? And also a little bit of caution. I mean, it's quite easy to get into, you know, races on Swift, even though you have a platform there. Sometimes it is easy for your perspective and focus to be on winning the race with the guy trying to pass you, compared to actually doing what you need to do.
Yeah, understood. Allan, I mean, from you, because also, you know, interesting one here, you know, something you have always emphasized with me though is, you know, your hard days are only as good as your easy days. But one of the risks I see, you know, particularly with, don't get me wrong, I mean, you know, Zwift is what it is, but, you know, I don't use Zwift a lot because I'm competitive. And when I get on Zwift, I want to race with guys and I want to stay in the group. And so actually, isn't there a bit of a risk here as well? I mean, that with indoor, because of what you talked about, Nick, you know, the 1.5 kind of rule, and you can actually do too much effort, Allan? I mean, you know, what's your opinion on that? You know, like, can you also, should you also think about indoor more for easy riding than hard riding? I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, don't be afraid to, let's face it, you know, a lot of the people on this call have very intense work ethics or working hours that they need to attend to. So don't be afraid to put an indoor session as your recovery day. You know, you yourself, Jamie, you know, mate, you get on the ergo in the morning, you know, you're riding it, you know, what, 120 watts, you know, really easy.
Yeah.
Really easy. So at the same time, you can get an hour's work done as well. You know, you can answer some emails, you can get on a call if you like. You know, you're not in a really, you know, you're not in a way that you cannot breathe. You know, you're in a state of mind where, you know, you're actually getting ahead of your work because you're getting not only your training done, you're getting another hour's work done before work day starts. And I think that's mentally
which we're going to move on to in a second, Allan. We're going into that because we promised people we're going to talk about that. We had a lot of questions on that, so we're going to get into that. There was a question there from Blaine on you know, on diet, you know, saying that when I get on the bike and I do my indoor, I tend to be quite hungry afterwards, so then I overeat. Now on diet, we're going to come specifically to nutrition on some of the later episodes. But I think you have pinpointed something there, which relates to, you know, when you work out in the indoor bike, it can be quite intense. So you do need to look after diet. And Mick, you know, you and I, you've always emphasized with me to really look after my hydration as well when I'm on the bike. Can you say a bit more about that on the indoor trainer?
Yeah, sure. Well, you just don't have the general airflow as you would riding outdoors. You know, you're riding along at your nice steady pace. You have so much air coming across you and wicking that sweat away, and keeping that core body temperature lower.
Yeah, very, very important.
You should try to obviously indoor replicate that as much as you can. So a good fan, at least one, maybe even two fans. I mean, you can buy a bunch of them. They're really cheap. Just jump onto Amazon or whatever. So that cooling effect is really important to keep that core temperature as low as possible.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. But, you know, it's also, you know, Mick, you always say, you know, if it hasn't happened in training, it's not likely to happen in the race. So I also sometimes, you know, when I'm preparing, for example, heading down to South Africa in March, you know, when I'm doing the Tour of Good Hope or preparing for one of my favorites, you know, the Cape Town Cycle Classic, I train without the fan because I want to give my body that experience, you know, sort of adjusting to the heat that I'm going to be hitting going from a European winter into South African, you know, late summer as well. So it's not just about, you know, cooling. It can also actually be preparing your body for some heat stress. But hydration, super important.
Super important.
There was also a question there. Let's have a look. There's a question there. There was a terrific one from Raf about the night before and Flower Girls, but I think I'll leave that one aside because I think that's getting into the ism sort of direction. There was a question there from Michael around tailor-made spin bikes, you know, what bikes and stuff, normal bikes. You know, it's an interesting one. I mean, Allan, you use a watt bike, so maybe you can just talk about your experience with that, you know, the pros and cons in your experience. Very solid, because you put out big watts.
Yeah, I mean, watt bike, I find it incredible. You know, the information you can relate to on the screen is incredible, and the feel of it as well is very similar to what you have out on the road. For me personally, it's been, you know, a huge investment in my career and just in my life now, you know, post-career. I can really get on there and engage where I'm at, you know, the information it can give you, not only with watts, but everything else it has integrated in the platform is amazing. So I find it really well, the watt bike. And just going a little bit further in
just want to, we don't want to make this like, because we're not a commercial platform. So I think, you know, you hit the big benefits of watt bike in terms of, you know, the benefit, you know, I see definitely the metrics you can track. You mentioned that. But also one of the things about watt bike is you're able to track pedaling efficiency, because in terms of the quality of the power meter inside the bike, it's far superior to many of the other on-bike power meters. So things like hamstring activation, you know, on watt bike, very, very, very good to track. Me personally, I'm using, you know, I've got a fluid trainer. Now there's a very practical reason for that, is because it's very quiet. And I do a lot of my training. My setup is in my living room. I'll show you a photo of it in a second. And I need it to be quiet, not to wake up the kids and my wife in the morning. The other thing is I have a beautiful, you know, Reynolds stainless steel 953 frame that I use, Madison Genesis. Now, why is that? Because I do a lot of explosive work on the indoor trainer. And I've had some nasty experiences with very thin rear carbon stays. So I hope that answers your question. But, you know, so all of these different platforms have their pros and cons. The point that I'm making is you have to, you know, also think about your living situation, what fits with your living situation. Allan?
I'd just like to take it a little bit further with this indoor training. I mean, the other real benefit from it is, you know, when you're doing efforts, so to speak, you can really get a really good gauge on your numbers, because let's face it, on the outside, you have wind directions on every current day changes. So you can really get a gauge on the specific numbers that you're doing in the effort, you know, to analyze and also to move forward with those numbers, you know, to gauge your form. So it's another good one.
Absolutely. Yep. And, you know, also very important, you know, I've actually got like 3 indoor trainers at home. Now, the reason for that, you know, is also sometimes I literally set them up side by side, because I have my road bike on one and then I have my TT bike on another. You know, also sometimes I just want to do really light spinning. So I have my, you know, track rollers that I'll use as well. So, you know, it's all about, you know, specificity to task, but definitely if you're a TT guy, or girl out there, you know, you definitely need also to be doing your indoor in that position, you know, because you know, physiologically it's different being in that TT position. So you need to do that, you know, as well. And Mick, I'm sure you relate to that one.
Amy, you must be a really, really good negotiator with your wife to be able to have 3 home trainers in the living room.
Let me talk about that in a second, all right? Because the next topic, actually the question we had, which now, Frederica, it's your turn because you've been waiting for this. Yes, Mick, you know, I mean, I have a fantastic relationship with my wife, my kids, but it does take a bit of negotiation to get a indoor trainer in the living room, and it stays there, right? And it's not coming and going. But also that's one of the reasons I have my beautiful Reynolds bike, because it's an attractive looking piece of equipment, you know? So that's, you know, but it wasn't easy. But, you know, my wife knows how important it is to me. But as I said, you know, how do I compensate for that? I vacuum the house a lot. I load the washing machine. I take the rubbish out. I do all the stuff that I should be doing, because it's all about give and take, is my belief. Look, let's talk about productivity, because this is a super important one for me. You know, I'm very busy with my speaking, with travel, with my teaching. So the reality is, you know, I sometimes think, gosh, you know, masters athletes tell me they don't have time to train. But actually, I think, are you really thinking creatively about that? The other thing that people, you know, will sometimes say is, oh, I'm on Zwift today. I'm on Zwift today. I look at their Strava. I think, gosh, how do they have all this time just to play a computer game? You know, because what are they doing when they're on Zwift? They're not exactly being work productive, right? So look, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Zwift. I think Zwift have its place, but let me talk you through some ideas. So the first one is, you can absolutely do work on your bike, on your indoor trainer, but you need to be aware of 3 kinds of what I call cognitive gears, right? The first cognitive gear is basically downtime, because as a working professional, and here we're really talking about knowledge workers, you need time for introspection and reflection. If you're busy all the time, You're not consolidating your memories. You're not, actually giving your brain that downtime to recover, replenish. Your frontal cortex is overstimulated. The second one is kind of what I call the easy tasks, and that's email, editing a PowerPoint presentation. It's talking to a colleague on the phone, just easy conversation. Even joining in a Zoom webinar where it's just listening in, tuning in, but you're not presenting as such, right? Then we've got this third sort of level, which is really thinking. So it's really thinking about a problem, a complex relationship, stuff like that. All right. Does that all make sense? Mick, you following? You with me on this one? Good. So the thing we're getting into here is that if you're going to be productive on your bike indoor, you need to match it to the level of those tasks, right? So if you're doing downtime, of course, right? That's zone one, because zone one is you're watching Netflix or you're watching some YouTube or whatever. It's not intense. That's great. You can do that on your bike because you need that relaxation. But the other stuff, the second level cognitive tasks, you can also do on your bike, because you can scan your emails, you can look at your agenda, you can read a report, you can do all that kind of stuff. I do about 5 or 6 hours of those easy tasks a week. On my indoor trainer. However, you need to be in zone 1 or 2 heart rate, right? Now, Mick, you talked about this. You said in the last years of your professional career, you were riding less with other guys and more alone, not because you didn't like other guys. What were you doing when you were out on those lone rides?
I became a passionate fan of audiobooks.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was really beneficial to my career, particularly my transition from a pro cyclist back to normal day life and back to a normal role. I used that time. I read a lot of business books during that period, and I found it very helpful and made my training just pass by really fast.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a point. We all need to learn. We all need to develop ourselves. So again, Swift is fine, but you're probably not learning anything when you're on Swift, as opposed to watching a TED Talk about a topic you're curious about, leadership, managing a high performing team, whatever. You can do that. But why does it have to be zone 1 or 2 heart rate? Because actually it's very simple. When your heart rate starts getting up into the sort of zone 4 zone, particularly high zone 3, zone 4, and certainly in threshold, your brain switches off. Now there's a reason for that. If you think about it, go back in evolutionary history, when would your heart rate have got really high? When you were a hunter-gatherer. Probably when something's trying to eat you, right? You're being chased by a tiger or something, So you're running like hell, really at your max. Well, guess what? What happens then is the reptilian, flight or fight mode kicks in, and your concentration narrows very much. So actually, to be doing this sort of work, you do need to be in this zone 1 or 2. When you get into those higher zones, you can't be productive. The other thing, of course, Allan, when you get me doing the on-say kit, the HIIT training, high intensity, man, I would probably throw up on my keyboard or something. And I don't want to throw up on my keyboard. That'd be messy, right? So you don't want to be doing that kind of really, you can't even think about that. When you're doing your intervals, when you're doing your HIIT, you're not thinking about email, talking to a colleague, right? Because you're passing that level. So I hope that all makes sense for you. But Allan, doesn't this also come back to what we often talk about, which is you need those hours of recovery on the bike, not just every session smashing yourself?
Yeah, that's exactly right, mate. That's what I touched on before. Don't be afraid to make a recovery day, to utilize it, utilize it using indoor cycling, and get a bit of your work done while you're doing it. And that will really, kickstart your day in terms of your work life as well.
Yeah. Okay. Super. And just on the practical stuff that people asked us about, you see on my setup on the right there, I've got my Garmin. You see also what sort of zone I'm in there. Heart rate typically under 120, cadence of 90. For me, that's sort of at around 160, 180 watts, just cruising. And that's the sort of zone that I'll be in for doing this kind of work. And I do, 4 or 5 hours of that kind of zone 1, 2 work a week, because it's just about active recovery. Now we'll talk about polarized training a little bit as well down the line, because this is part of that. On a practical level, I've got a holder there for my tablet, wireless keyboard. I tried voice activated you know, like dictation for email, but I was sending really weird stuff to people. So I tend not to do that, that too much. So the other thing, of course, is I just use paper and pen. You know, I have a notepad, a diary. So when I'm thinking stuff, I'm getting ideas, I'm just jotting it down. Much easier to use paper and pen sitting on a bike and pedaling than using the keyboard. So hope that all makes sense for people. Let's move on. Let's move on. Let's continue. So what we're going to talk about now is the happily ever after. Allan, we had this question. Would you like to, you want to read it out for us? This was a question from a guy in Belgium who messed up in a race last year.
In a race last year, I got in an early breakaway with 5 guys and we worked really hard. In the end, I messed up the sprint and came 4th. Not the best sprinter, but what should I have done to get on the podium?
Right. Now, at this point, we're going to invite in a special guest, Professor Albie. Alan's going to leave us because he's got some stuff to do. We're going to invite Professor Albie back in. I'll just give him a call to check he's online. Professor Albie, are you with us, mate? Yeah, he's there. All right. Switch your video on. Professor Albie, welcome.
The Basque Country. Welcome, everyone. Hope everyone's well.
Professor Albie, you're going to talk us through these tactics. Let's go.
Yes, I mean, this one really relates to my quote that you all know from the last webinar. Only work as hard as the least hardest working rider in the group. You know,
but Allan, if you do that, guys might shout at you, mate. They might get angry with you.
Oh, don't worry about that. You got another guy to come in with you. If they start shouting at you, you can say he's doing the same. You know. Well, that's very important. You know, you'll find a lot of times you'll get in a breakaway and there's someone really driving it and the other guys are just sitting back smiling, you know, just thinking, look at this, you know, we're going to the finish. We know we're going to get to the finish. You know, we're using this guy to get there basically. So you don't want to be that guy or lady. So you don't want to be that rider. So,
but that's not going to make you very popular, mate.
Mate, you're not here to win a popularity contest. You're here to win a bike race.
Fair enough, Allan.
Yeah. So,
Professor Albie. Sorry, Professor Albie.
No worries at all, Jamie. So, yeah. So if you keep that in mind, you know, you'll have a lot more energy when you get to the final. You know, not only for a sprint, but even you have more energy for the option to break away solo yourself in the last kilometers or whatever of the bike race. So really keep that quote in the back of your mind when you're racing. Okay,
excellent. What about knowing the finish? Let's talk a bit about this one because, you know, a bit more detail about the technology and stuff. We do, Allan. We do the homework, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Professor Albie.
Yeah, we have. You know, I normally have five pointers that I work off. You know, and one of them's knowing the finish. You know, do your research. Use technology that's out there today. You know, jump on YouTube. You know, there may be footage of the exact race and finish from previous editions, previous years. Oh. Check it out. You know, you'll find that visual image will be stuck in your brain. And also, you don't be afraid to use Google Earth, things like this, just to get a screenshot of the finished road. You'd be amazed what you can find with technology that will help you in your racing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Talk to us about positioning and wind and stuff there, Professor Albie.
Yeah, another really important factor of this is, you know, the wind direction. You know, there's also technology about this. I personally use my windsock. You know, as a sports director, this was great. This pinpointed the wind direction where you're going at the time of day you're there, not only the general daily forecast that the news gives. So don't be afraid again to use technology to find information that will affect your result. Positioning is another really good one with this as well. You want to know which way you want to come off the wheel, for example. Or, for example, if it's a big headwind, you don't want to be on the front. You want to be third, fourth wheel, you know, and making a late charge. Or vice versa, if it's a big tailwind, don't be afraid to go a little bit earlier in the sprint.
Yeah. And, you know, we've also talked about this, Allan, because one of the things that you know, and I started doing that, right? I mean, I always go and recce the finish, particularly those more important events. And it's not just the Google Earths and stuff, you know, it's physically going there, riding up and down the road, looking at where the potholes are. Because that, you know, you can go right where other guys have to go left. that happened earlier with me this year in Casablanca, a big hole in the road. I went right and I saved about 2 meters of ground from that. You know, I'll look for the physical signals, you know, like the McDonald's, you know, on the right, or the pink building on the left. That's at 150 meters to go. That's where I'm going to hit the front. So it's knowing what you're going to do, not just doing it in the moment, right? You've talked to me about that. Let's talk about this other one. Actually, sorry, back on positioning, because you said, what about if there's like a corner late in the race, or there's, you know, like you said, a long straight? What's the difference if it's more technical coming in? What do you want then?
It's another, you know, going back to knowing the finish as well. You know, if you can see, you know, a lot of these guys in this call probably from Belgium and the Dutch, you know, racing Kermeses and Criterions, you know, where there's just a lot of corners. So a lot of times there will be a corner within the last 200 meters.
Yep.
So no, there's not far to go from the exit of that corner to the finish line. So you have to be positioned well going into the corner, if not in front, second wheel, you know. So you have to make adjustments to be able to do that. And the more times you do it, the more relaxed you get in the situation of doing it further forward, moving forward as well.
Absolutely. There's a question came in from Ronald about the name of the wind app. There's other quite technical questions coming in. What we're going to do, we're going to prepare with our mate Sean Rolls, an Aussie living in Sweden. We're going to prepare some webinar notes. So with some of these more technical questions, we're going to send you that information in the webinar notes. And as I said, on some of these more specific topics, we'll come to those in later episodes as well. There's another very important piece of advice here, right, Professor Elby?
Never put your hands up before the line, guys. My grandfather taught me this as a 10-year-old starting cycling from Bundaberg. So, yeah, just a little tip, you know, if you've got this in the back of your mind, you know, you'll never be the one that putting your hands up and under your elbow, someone will take the victory away from you. Make sure you get the line and then put the hands up.
Albie, have you ever won a race by someone else putting their hands up in the air prior to the line?
Yes, mate, I have. I'll maybe share a photo with you. I've got a really good photo of me as a second-year professional, no name, so to speak, beating Laurent Brochard in doing exactly this.
Okay.
Just it was his hometown. He put the hands up at the big crowd there. Got him by a couple of millimeters.
Professor Albie?
Yes, sir.
Just before you show that photo, I have one question.
Yes, mate.
Is that you in your banana suit in the photo there?
Mate,
what race was that?
This is in 2010 in Delhi. I think the theme was based on Ronald McDonald.
Or bananas in pajamas.
Okay, that's fantastic. So tip number 6 from Mick Rogers is never win a sprint dressed as a banana. That's a good one. I like that one. I mean, look, the other thing though is we have masters athletes listening in here. As a master, for me, it's sometimes not about winning the race as such, right? Because we have mixed age groups.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'm sprinting and you know, I'm crossing the line in 7th position, 10th position. I put my hands in the air because I know I've just won my age group classification. So don't be shy, folks. You know, if you win, celebrate the joy of that, whether you're coming in 15th overall or 24th. If you know where you are in your age group, put your hands up. The other thing, you know, for a lot of us, actually, it's not sprinting for the win, it's sprinting for a qualification. So if you're doing a UCI World Series race, you're coming in with a small group, you got to sprint, right? Because that could be the difference between qualifying or not. You remember this, Mick, you came to watch me race the Varese qualifier race, right? And I crashed on that horrendous descent, second descent. I was out of the overall, you know, race, but I came in with a small group. I sprinted and won from that small group, and I finished 54th out of 216 in my age group. So that was the difference. That was scraping in for the qualification. So
yeah, fair point.
It's not about sprinting to be first across the line. It's also about sprinting for qualification, or even just celebrating the joy of getting across the line. And that's the same. If you're alone and your goal is actually riding up Mont Ventoux or going for that com, when you get to the top of Mont Ventoux alone, if that's been your goal, you make sure you raise your hands.
Sure.
When you get to that top, you get to the summit, raise your hands, because you should be celebrating the joy. All right, guys, I'm worried of the time. Oh yeah, I've got to show this actually, because, you know, before I started working with Professor Albie, I had this brain scan done at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin. And I don't know if you can see something here, folks, but this brain scan, you see what's happening in the frontal cortex? There's nothing there. There's nothing there, right? Because I wasn't thinking tactically as much as I do now. Now, what I'm going to show you actually is the same brain scan that I got done at the Max Planck Institute in Berlin last year after working with Professor Albie. Can you see the difference?
Wow.
Mick, can you see that?
It happens quite a lot to my students there, Jamie.
Professor Albie, mate, look, actually, Mick, this is not a real brain scan. I made it myself, but I think it gives you guys the picture, right? Because what it's about is using your brain. You don't win bike races with your legs.
Yes.
Right? You don't win. Okay, you got to be there. You got to have the level. You got to put out the watts. But I often beat guys who are stronger than me, who train harder than me, who put in more hours than I do. And why is that? Because they don't use their head. I'm sure that, I don't know if you got a comment on that one, Mick?
I do, because I learned my first years as a professional was legs and strength is the last resort. That's the last weapon in the armory that you have. So.
Excellent. Good. From you, Professor Albie, some words on strength versus brain?
Well, I've always been a big believer, it's not only in cycling, it's everything in life. We need to always have our utilizing our brain to our fullest capacity. And, you'll hardly go wrong if you have this good combination in your lifestyle.
Excellent. Good. Thanks a lot, Professor. And
thank you, Professor.
Also, folks, we're going to do something special. We've had such an amazing response from all of you with the questions and level of engagement. So what we're actually planning on this week, actually on Friday, is we're going to have what we call Professor Albie's Fireside Chat. So if you're interested in having a very intimate discussion on video, audio activated with Professor Albie, then please send an email to Allan. Oh, Allan, you're back. How's it going? Oh, sorry. So you all have Allan's email because that came out to you in the registration and follow-up mails you've had. So drop Allan an email if you'd like to be part of that. It's going to be this week on Friday, same time, 11 o'clock CET, 10 o'clock GMT, 7 p.m. Australia time. If you would like to be part of that, we're opening up. We can only host 6 to 7 people. So drop us a mail. There's not going to be any sophisticated mechanism for choosing people. We'll put your names in a hat, we'll pull them out, and then we'll notify the 6 or 7 people who will join. If you do miss out, if we can't host you, then we will be recording the fireside chat as well, and we'll be sharing that with you afterwards. But we'll mention that in the follow-up email. Also, very important, you've got our contact details here, LinkedIn, Twitter. For those of you who have been sending me lots of questions about my training, of course, I put everything on Strava. So all of my detail, whenever I do, for example, very specific sessions like seated power, micro intervals, variable cadence, TT workouts, I actually not just upload my ride, I also upload the details of the protocol, including my wattages and the interval times and all that stuff. So you want any of that detail, follow me on Strava. It's all there. You can also interact with me there on any specific training questions. The other thing we would like to mention is thank you to all of you who've been amazing in spreading the word for This Cycling Life. We really do need you folks out there to share, to retweet, to post us on your WhatsApp groups and your Facebook groups. So please continue doing that. We've had an amazing response. Thank you very much. Of course, we also now have our YouTube channel, This Cycling Life. Please subscribe to that one. And as we said, social media, we also have the hashtag This Cycling Life. So please follow that one. Also, any comments, questions, we'll be following that as well. Finally, we would like, again, to give another big thank you to Mitch Docker, who's a very close friend of This Cycling Life. If you haven't listened to his Fabulous Life in the Peloton podcast, please do so. Always awesome. Thank you, Mitch. with that, we would like to close this episode of This Cycling Life. And of course, what we always do is we finish with some words of wisdom. Over to you, Mick Rogers. You always say it, mate.
Not happening in training. It's not going to happen in racing.
Good on you, Mick. Thank you. And for our Professor Allan Davis.
Only work as hard as the least hardest working rider in the group. You can't go wrong.
And of course, my advice to everyone is, of course, your hard days are only as good as your easy days. So thank you, everyone. Fabulous to have you again with us. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of This Cycling Life.
Thank you, everyone.